Picture waking up without any kind of alarm. No vibration from a phone on the nightstand, no sound of traffic bleeding through the walls, no agenda to review, no messages sitting unanswered, no appointments demanding your attention. Instead, your eyes open gradually to the pale gray glow of early dawn, pressing through the entrance of a rock shelter. The air carries a cool sharpness to it, laced with the smell of dying wood smoke and damp earth. Somewhere not far from you, voices murmur as the people around you begin coming back to life. A baby stirs and cries for a moment, then quiets. Laughter rises from somewhere nearby. Outside, birds are calling back and forth in the slowly brightening sky. This is how human beings woke up for the better part of 1,000,000 years. This was morning. It is 40,000 years ago. I'd give or take 1,000 generations. You are a Homo sapiens, living somewhere across the landmass that we would now divide into Europe, Africa, or Asia. Biologically, you are identical to a person alive right now. Same brain capacity, same skeletal frame, the same machinery for language and thought and feeling. But the world surrounding you, the texture of your daily life, is so foreign to the one we inhabit that it sits just at the edge of imagination. And that is exactly the question that keeps archaeologists and anthropologists endlessly circling. What did a day actually look like for you? There is an image that most of us carry without questioning it, one built up over decades of films and television documentaries. Primitive cavemen, hunched and hairy, perpetually sprinting away from enormous predatory cats, spending every conscious hour in desperate pursuit of food, perpetually hovering at the edge of starvation, lives that were, in the famous phrase, nasty, brutish, and short. That is the picture we have all inherited. Prehistoric life as one long, unbroken ordeal of terror and toil. Except that picture is almost entirely wrong. What the archaeological record actually reveals is something far more layered and far more human. Early people were not simply surviving, they were living. They had social worlds that were rich and complicated, time set aside for leisure, developed traditions of art and music, things we would recognize as spirituality and humor. They gathered around fires and passed stories from mouth to mouth. They decorated their own bodies, and they carved small figurines with extraordinary care, and covered cave walls with images of animals so vivid they still stop visitors in their tracks today. They looked after elderly members of their groups, and after those who were injured or disabled. They buried their dead with deliberate ceremony, placing objects alongside the bodies. They had culture, deep, elaborate, sophisticated culture that we are only now beginning to piece together properly. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Before we reach the cave paintings and the ritual burials, we need to understand something more fundamental. What did an ordinary day look like? How did the people who came before us occupy their hours when there were no jobs to travel to, no bills waiting on the table, no shops to visit? When the word survival carried a meaning entirely different from the one it holds now? The answer is probably going to catch you off guard. Early humans almost certainly worked less than you do. Research drawn from studying contemporary hunter-gatherer communities, which give us the closest available window onto how prehistoric life may have been organized, consistently shows that people devoted somewhere between 4 and 6 hours a day to what we would classify as subsistence work. Finding food, hunting, getting meals ready, keeping tools functional, maintaining their shelters. That was it. Everything beyond that was leisure time. Talking, playing, making things, telling stories, simply sitting together without any particular purpose. This sits in direct contradiction to everything civilization has told us about progress. And we picture our ancestors as people who were desperately short of everything we now take for granted, while we are the comfortable, time-rich ones. But when you look at raw hours of free time, the calculation may actually run the other way. A person living 40,000 years ago likely had more genuinely unstructured hours in a single week than most people living today manage in an entire month. If you are listening to this to help yourself fall asleep, that is exactly the reason these videos exist. Perhaps subscribe and leave a note telling us where you are and what time it is for you right now. I do read those comments, and what strikes me every time is how far this reaches. Someone in Tokyo watching the first light come in. Someone in London on a lunch break. Someone in California lying in the dark at midnight. All of them drifting off to the same stories about where we all came from. The more carefully we study prehistoric life, the less simple the picture becomes. Yes, the dangers were real. Injuries happened frequently and often turned serious. Children died young at rates that would devastate us today. Infections that a single course of antibiotics would clear up now could be lethal then. Average life expectancy was lower than ours, though perhaps not by as much as most people assume. If you made it through the earliest years of childhood, there was a reasonable chance you would live into your 50s, or even your 60s. Some people lived considerably longer than that. But here is the part that matters most. Within those years, people lived lives that were genuinely full. They laughed. They loved. They grieved. They created things. And they struggled and they celebrated. They were not biological machines running a survival program. They were human in every sense we understand that word. They had the same foundational needs we carry. Food and shelter, yes, but also connection, a sense of meaning, beauty, and play. So let us walk through a day together. Not an exceptional day involving a mammoth hunt or a confrontation with a rival group, though those things happen too. Just a regular day. An ordinary day, 40,000 years ago, when someone woke up to the dawn and moved through their life in ways that were simultaneously utterly alien and strangely recognizable to how we move through ours. Because understanding how our ancestors actually spent their time does not only tell us something about the past, it raises uncomfortable questions about the present and about how we live now, about what we gained when civilization arrived, and what, if anything, we quietly left behind, about whether progress always points in the direction we assume it does. Let us start at the very beginning, with that moment when gray light filters through the entrance of the rock shelter and another prehistoric day begins. You are not waking to an alarm. There are no alarms. The concept of being late does not exist. There is no schedule pressing on you, no one waiting impatiently. Instead, consciousness returns slowly, on its own terms, drawn back by the sky brightening by degrees and by the small movements of the people around you. The first thing you register is the cold. Not the kind of cold that threatens your life, not the deep chill of midwinter, but that crisp, eye-biting morning air that makes you reluctant to give up the warmth of where you are lying. Your sleeping place is a layer of dried grass and animal skins, and you are pressed close to other members of your group. Not out of any particular feeling of intimacy, simply because warmth is too important to waste. Body heat is a resource. The second thing you notice is what you can smell: wood smoke. It is always there, a constant undertone, though it is faint now because the fire that burned through the night has mostly died down to embers. Mixed into it is the scent of bodies that have not been washed. Not unpleasant exactly, just deeply human. The lingering smell of rendered fat from the previous day's food. The mineral earthiness of the stone walls. If your group has camped near the coast, maybe there is salt in the air. If it is spring and you are somewhere inland, maybe the smell of new growth has crept in overnight. Someone is already awake. There is always someone already awake. Sleep in the Paleolithic was structured very differently from how most of us experience it today. Evidence gathered both from sleep research and from close study of contemporary hunter-gatherer populations suggests that early humans probably practiced what scientists call biphasic or polyphasic sleep. You would sleep for several hours after darkness fell, then wake for a stretch in the middle of the night. This middle-of-the-night waking was not insomnia. It was simply how sleep worked. During that period, people might talk quietly, tend to the fire, check on children, or lie still in the dark with their own thoughts, the way people do when the world has gone silent. And what this meant in practice was that at any given moment through the night, at least one person was probably conscious. One person was listening for the sounds that should not be there. The particular weight of a footstep, the snap of a branch, the distant sound of an animal moving through the dark in a way that signaled something approaching rather than passing through. Safety was not a condition you could simply assume. It was something maintained hour by hour through collective attention. The person who is awake right now is feeding the fire. You can hear the small sounds of movement, the sudden brightening of the light as fresh fuel catches. Fire management was perhaps the single most important skill a group could possess. Let it go out completely, and you faced an ugly choice. Either walk to another group's fire, possibly miles away, and ask to carry embers back, or spend exhausting time using friction to coax a new flame from wood. Better by far to keep it burning. Better to make sure someone always accepted responsibility for tending it through the long hours of the night. Who took on that duty varied from group to group. Sometimes it fell to older members who slept lightly anyway, and who had long since demonstrated their value to the group in 100 different ways. Sometimes it rotated among younger adults, particularly those without infants demanding their full attention. Sometimes it was simply an unspoken understanding that everyone contributed their share to keeping the group alive. As the fire builds and the light in the shelter warms, more people begin to stir. Children usually wake first, and with more energy than anyone around them is quite ready for. A small voice breaks the quiet, then the rustle of someone moving, then a mother's soft murmur telling a child to stay close, stay warm, wait just a little longer for the sun. But children have never been good at waiting. Within minutes, some of the older ones are on their feet, breathing visible in the cold, moving toward the warmth at the center of the space. The adults take longer. There is no particular hurry. This is essential to understand, because everything else flows from it. The idea of rushing, of being pressed for time, of hurrying from one obligation to the next, these are modern inventions. Your day is governed by light, by hunger, by the feel of the air, and the turning of the seasons. The sun has barely begun to paint the eastern sky. Hours remain before anything urgently needs doing. For now, what matters most is moving from sleep into wakefulness in a way that does not burn the energy you will need for whatever the day brings. People stretch carefully, working the stiffness out of muscles that spent the night against the ground. They yawn and scratch and attend to the immediate demands of the body. If you are in a rock shelter or cave, there is probably a designated area for waste, far enough from the sleeping space to prevent contamination, but close enough to remain within the safety of the group. Someone, probably one of the more experienced members of the band, moves to the edge of the sleeping area and steps outside to take the first reading of the morning. Not exactly out of anxiety, but out of habit and care. What changed while everyone slept? Are there tracks near the camp that were not there yesterday? What is the weather building toward? Is that bank of cloud in the west carrying rain, or just moving through? Has the wind shifted? And if so, what is it bringing? This morning assessment is not a casual glance around. Paleolithic people were readers of the landscape in ways that are almost impossible for most of us to imagine now. They could interpret the behavior of birds to know whether a predator was moving nearby. They could read weather patterns days out by watching cloud formations and feeling the weight of the air. They could read an individual animal's tracks and tell you whether it was traveling at a walk or a run, roughly when it passed, whether it was healthy or carrying an injury, alone or with a herd. All of that information gets processed and, just as importantly, shared. As more people wake and gather near the growing fire, a conversation begins. Quiet at first, then picking up as the group comes back into its collective self. Dreams might be talked about. The mind of a Paleolithic person probably did not draw a firm boundary between dreaming and waking. A vivid dream might carry the weight of a message, a warning, a visit from someone who was no longer alive. Such things were worth bringing into the light, worth considering together. Loose plans begin to form. The group needs food, as it always does. The question is what kind and where to look for it. Someone might mention that a certain stand of berry bushes seemed close to ripe when they passed it 2 days ago. Someone else recalls signs of a large animal moving through a particular valley. A third voice suggests checking the fishing spots near the bend in the river. None of this arrives as orders, and there is no commander standing above the group issuing instructions. Instead, decisions emerge the way they always do in close-knit communities, through conversation, through the gradual building of agreement, through individuals choosing to follow the people whose knowledge they trust. But all of that is still ahead. Right now, in these early minutes before the sun clears the horizon, the main activity is simply being together again. Your band, the extended family unit that is also your survival structure, is reassembling after the night's fragmentation. Everyone made it through another window of vulnerability. Everyone is here. There is something quiet and powerful in that. Something that goes deeper than just the relief of a head count. It taps into something very old in us. Human beings evolved to need each other. In those who felt settled in groups, who drew comfort from proximity to their kin, who found cooperation satisfying rather than burdensome, those were the ones who made it through the bottleneck. Their descendants carry genes that make isolation feel wrong and community feel necessary. We are those descendants. The children are up and moving now. Their energy spills into the space around the fire. They are not playing anything organized, nothing with rules, just the natural, physical, almost animal play of young bodies, running and chasing and wrestling, building strength and coordination in the way that children always have. Adults watch with that particular split attention parents know well, allowing the chaos while staying ready to step in if someone strays too far, or the play tips into something genuinely dangerous. Meanwhile, the practical things are being assessed. Someone checks the tools used yesterday. Is that spear point still holding securely in its shaft? Has the carrying basket developed a weakness that needs seeing to? Is there enough cordage for today? Or does someone need to sit down and make more? None of this feels like a chore in the way we mean the word. It is not work you tolerate before arriving at the things you actually want to do. It is simply part of the texture of being alive, as natural as breathing. And through all of this, none of it is happening against a clock. The sun has risen further now. The chill is beginning to soften. You have been awake for perhaps an hour, though there is no way to measure that, and no reason to care. Your stomach is beginning to make itself known. Others around you are probably feeling the same pull. So food will become the focus soon, but not quite yet. For now, you are warm. You are safe. You are surrounded by people whose fortunes are bound to yours and whose survival increases the odds of your own. This is what waking up looked like in the Paleolithic. No jarring, sudden return to consciousness. No race to get yourself ready. Just the slow, communal, unhurried transition from sleep into the day, guided by light and warmth and the ancient rhythms that shaped human life for hundreds of thousands of years. That pull to wake up slowly, to ease into the morning rather than attacking it, that is not laziness. That is your Paleolithic brain remembering how mornings used to work, back when there was time, and the only clock that mattered was the arc of the sun. Let us talk about breakfast. Except that your ancestors, 40,000 years ago, I did not have breakfast, not in any sense we would recognize. They did not wake at a fixed hour and move to a kitchen and prepare a meal from ingredients stored in a refrigerator. They had no meal times at all, not really. They ate when food was available, when the body demanded it, when an opportunity presented itself. To modern ears, this sounds chaotic, but it was not. It was perfectly suited to the reality they lived in. Your stomach growls as the morning light fills the shelter. You are hungry, so you eat. It is as simple and unconflicted as that. What you are eating depends entirely on what has been gathered and what remains. There may be leftover meat from 2 days ago, when hunters brought back a red deer. It has been hanging at the cool back of the shelter, wrapped in its own hide, away from direct light. The cold autumn air has kept it from turning, though it is beginning to give off a smell that tells you it should be finished today. You pull away a strip and chew slowly. It is tough and requires real effort from your jaw, but it is protein and fat, and precisely what your body needs after a night of sleep. Your teeth are strong. Your jaw muscles are powerful. Analysis of Paleolithic skulls has found remarkable patterns of dental wear, evidence of a lifetime spent working through foods with real texture. But those same teeth tell another story. Microscopic residues of plant material, starch granules from roots and tubers, fragments from seeds and nuts appear in the dental record alongside the evidence of meat. Your ancestors were not specialized carnivores. They ate everything they could. Beside the meat sits a section of bark, folded and sealed with pine resin, holding hazelnuts gathered 3 days ago. You crack a few against your back teeth using the technique you absorbed by watching it done 1,000 times before you ever tried it yourself. The exact angle and the precise amount of pressure needed to split the shell cleanly without crushing what is inside. Near the nuts is a leather pouch with dried blackberries, shriveled and concentrated from their time in the sun. Sweet enough to feel like a small event in your mouth. And then there are the roots resting near the edge of the fire. Someone with deep plant knowledge dug these from the riverbank yesterday. They are cattail roots, starchy and nutritious, but essentially inedible raw. They have been sitting within reach of the heat since last night, not in the flames, but close enough that the warmth has been slowly breaking down the tough fibers and converting difficult starches into sugars the body can use. This is cooking, though not the version we know. No recipes, no temperature gauges, no timers. Just knowledge that has accumulated across uncountable generations about what heat does to different foods. The roots have been resting in the residual warmth of the fire all night. By morning, they are soft enough to be worth eating, and sweet enough to be almost pleasant. You pull one from the edge of the fire carefully and peel back the outer skin. It is hot, but manageable. The flesh is not delicious by any modern measure, but it is filling, and more importantly, it is safe. Eaten raw, these roots contain compounds that would give you a miserable stomach. Roasted in the coals, they become a reliable staple. This discovery that fire could expand the range of plants a group could safely eat may be one of the most consequential technological insights in human history. It effectively doubled or tripled the number of plant species available as food. Roots that were toxic raw became dietary foundations when cooked properly. Seeds that would have passed through the body unused became nutritious when ground and heated. The evidence for this breadth of diet comes from multiple directions. Fossilized feces found at archaeological sites across Europe and Africa, when examined under microscopes, contain an astonishing variety of plant remains. Seeds from dozens of distinct species, pollen from flowers, microscopic fragments of leaves and bark and roots. Some samples include insect material, grasshoppers, beetle larvae, and termites. These do not appeal to modern Western palates, but they are genuinely excellent sources of protein and fat, and many hunter-gatherer communities today regard them as desirable food. There is no reason to think early humans felt differently. Hardened dental plaque scraped from the teeth of Paleolithic skulls tells a similar story. Plant starches from across a wide spectrum appear when analyzed under high magnification. Wild grains, root vegetables, nuts, berries, even plant fibers that were probably chewed to extract moisture or to prepare them for other uses. What emerges from all of this is a picture of extraordinary dietary flexibility. Your ancestors were not specialists. They were opportunists, capable of drawing nutrition from virtually anything their environment offered. Groups along coastlines ate fish and shellfish and seabirds and sea mammals alongside whatever plants grew near the shore. Forest-dwelling communities inland ate deer and wild boar, nuts and berries and mushrooms. Groups near rivers ate fish and waterfowl and aquatic plants. This flexibility was not incidental. It was the foundation of resilience. Environments shift. Seasons move through their cycles. Animal migrations follow patterns that are not always predictable. A group that depended on one or two food sources would be in serious trouble the moment those sources became scarce. A group that could find nutrition in 50 different things would always find something. While you eat, the rest of the camp is doing the same. A young mother shares nuts with her toddler and shows him how to crack the shells. His small hands lack both the strength and the precision he will eventually develop. But he is learning, and in a few years, he will be teaching younger children in turn. One of the older women is preparing something more complex. She is pounding leftover meat between two flat stones, working in rendered fat and dried berries. She is making something that will last, dense, concentrated food that can be carried on long journeys or held in reserve for leaner days. The knowledge behind this is technical and exact. The proportions of meat to fat to berries have to be right, or the mixture spoils. The pounding has to be thorough enough that everything binds together. She learned this from her mother, who learned it from hers. A chain of transmitted knowledge extending back through more generations than anyone could count. Nobody in this camp eats alone. That almost never happens. Food is social. It is shared, and it moves through the group according to rules that everyone understands without having them written down anywhere. The hunter who made the kill yesterday is not eating more than everyone else. He might actually be eating a little less, because that is how the system functions. You bring in an animal, you share it with the group, and when someone else makes a kill, they share with you. It is mutual insurance against bad luck. A social structure that holds the group together precisely because everyone benefits from everyone else's success. Children move freely between adults, reaching for food, being shooed away with a laugh, having pieces pressed into their hands. No one is stingy with children. And if there genuinely is not enough to go around, and the adults eat less so that the young ones do not. The morning meal is not ceremonial or formal. People eat standing up, sitting down, walking between tasks, checking equipment while they chew, but it is doing social work regardless. The group is together, reinforcing bonds, sharing the information that will shape the day. Who is heading out to gather? Who is making a hunt attempt? Who is staying to work on the hide that has been drying for 3 days? None of these decisions is issued as an instruction. They emerge from conversation, from the gradual building of shared intent. Someone mentions that the hazelnut grove to the north should be producing well at this point in the season. Several women and older children decide to go and check. Someone else notes that there were deer tracks near the river yesterday afternoon, and the hunters exchange a look, and a plan begins to form without anyone having to announce it. Food preparation is happening throughout all of this conversation. Hands are never quite still, seeds being ground between stones, dried herbs sorted, any that show signs of mold set aside. A teenager learning to use a sharp flint flake to cut thin strips of meat that will be spread out to dry. These skills are transmitted entirely through watching and doing. No written instructions, no formal teaching sessions. Children observe adults for years before they try. They attempt, they are corrected, they try again. By the time they are adults themselves, they carry inside them an encyclopedia of food knowledge. Which plants are edible and when? How to identify them in different seasons. Where to find them. How to prepare each one. How to store what can be stored. The scope of this knowledge is extraordinary. Studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer communities show that people typically hold detailed information about 200 or 300 plant species. They know which parts of each plant are useful, which require processing before they can be safely eaten, which have medicinal value, which are toxic under any circumstances, which are useful for other purposes entirely. Your ancestors almost certainly carried comparable knowledge. They had to. The cost of getting it wrong was too high. The wrong mushroom, and you do not survive the week. Roots prepared incorrectly, and you spend 3 days unable to move. This was not casual knowledge. It was life and death information, preserved with care and passed forward with intention. As the morning meal winds down, someone adds a few more sticks to the fire. It is never fully allowed to die if someone is paying attention, and someone almost always is. Fire is too valuable and too difficult to rebuild from nothing. The meal was not elaborate, but it was enough. Bellies are reasonably full. Energy levels will carry everyone through what the day demands, and that is all that was ever asked of it. Your ancestors were not people with refined culinary ambitions, but they understood nutrition at a deep intuitive level. They knew that variety across days and weeks mattered more than perfection at any single meal. They were eating to live, but they were also living to eat, in the sense that food carried pleasure even in its simplest forms. The satisfaction of cracking a nut perfectly, the brightness of ripe berries after days of more neutral flavors, and the deep richness of bone marrow roasted over fire. These were not just calories. They were experiences. They were moments of shared pleasure and connection to the landscape and to one another. And now, with morning fully arrived and the first hunger addressed, the day's real activities are about to begin. Here is something that nobody tells you about prehistoric life. The hunt captures all the drama, the dangerous confrontations with massive animals, the coordinated takedowns, the moments of genuine peril. That is what ends up in the museums and the films. But the uncomfortable truth, one that would have been self-evident to anyone actually living 40,000 years ago, is that hunting was the exception. Gathering was the rule. On any given day, somewhere between 60 and 80% of the calories your group consumed came from plants. The roots and tubers, nuts and seeds, berries, leaves, flowers. The exact proportion shifted with the season and the landscape. Groups living along coastlines might have drawn more of their nutrition from shellfish. Communities in the far north during winter might have leaned heavily on meat when plants were buried under snow. But for most human populations, in most places, across most of the year, it was plants that kept everyone alive. This was not because early humans had a particular preference for vegetables. It was straightforward mathematics. A successful hunt might yield enough meat to feed the group for several days, but hunts went wrong more often than they went right. Animals are fast. They are unpredictable. They require hours of careful tracking, precise coordination among hunters, and a meaningful amount of luck. Plants, now by contrast, stay exactly where they are. They grow in patterns that anyone with sufficient knowledge can learn to read and anticipate. So, while the hunters were out seeking something that might or might not come to fruition, the majority of the group was engaged in the more reliable work of survival, moving through the landscape with eyes trained by experience, reading signs invisible to anyone who had not spent years learning how to look. gathering the foods that would actually appear in tonight's meal. We need to be careful about the assumptions we bring to this picture. For decades, the standard account in anthropology divided prehistoric labor along neat gender lines. Men hunted, women gathered. This was presented as natural, perhaps even determined by biology. The actual evidence is more complicated and more interesting than that. Yes, in many prehistoric contexts, women who were pregnant or nursing tended toward gathering work because it was compatible with carrying infants. But not in all groups, and not exclusively. Archaeological sites have produced women buried with hunting weapons alongside the other markers of their lives. Isotope analysis of ancient bones has revealed some women with diets as heavily weighted toward meat as any male hunters. Some groups appear to have practiced communal hunting, in which everyone participated. Others had dedicated gatherers of both sexes who spent entire lives deepening their knowledge of plants. Prehistoric societies were, above all, practical. They organized the work in ways that made sense for their specific circumstances. The key point is this: do not imagine gathering as something lesser than hunting. And it was specialized knowledge. It required years of careful accumulation. And it was what kept the group fed on the days when the hunt came back with nothing. Imagine yourself on one of those gathering expeditions. It is mid-morning now. The sun has been climbing for a few hours, and the morning mist has burned away. You are heading out with 3 other people. Your mother's sister, who has carried plant knowledge in her memory for 40 years, and who knows these particular hills better than anyone else in the band. A younger cousin, maybe 11 years old, who is beginning to absorb the information she will spend the rest of her life building on. And your own child, 3 years old, resting in a sling of softened deer hide against your back. You are not wandering at random. Now you are following a mental map assembled over years of returning to the same places, season after season. The oak grove 3 miles north should be yielding acorns now. The patch of wild onions near the creek is probably past its best. But just beyond it is a stand of cattails where the roots are ready to dig. With some luck, you might come across a beehive. With very good luck, there might be bird eggs. The walk itself is no easy stroll. You will cover somewhere between 5 and 10 miles before the afternoon is over. Much of it across ground that would tax a modern hiker. Rocky slopes, dense undergrowth, streams to wade, ridges to climb. You are doing all of this while carrying a child and the tools of the work. A fire-hardened digging stick worn smooth from use. Several woven baskets nested together. A small leather bag for finer finds. A stone knife tucked into a belt of twisted plant fiber. But the difference between this and what we usually call work is attention. Gathering is not about exertion. It is about noticing. You are reading the landscape the way someone else might read a page, registering details that would mean nothing to a person who had not spent years learning what to look for. A faint change in soil color that indicates roots growing below the surface. The pattern of animal tracks suggesting a fruit tree somewhere nearby. The particular way light falls on a hillside that tells you which slope will have ripe berries. Your aunt stops at what looks, to you, like an unremarkable piece of ground. But she sees something you are still learning to recognize. A specific grass that reliably grows near a variety of edible root. And she presses her digging stick into the earth and works it in a slow circle. 3 inches down, she meets resistance. She works the stick around carefully, loosening the soil, then reaches in and pulls out a tuber the size of a closed fist. Pale and irregular, and entirely unappetizing to look at. But you know, from having eaten it before, that once it has spent a night in the coals of the fire, it will be sweet and filling. She hands it to you. You place it in the basket. She digs again. Another and another. This spot is yielding well. In 10 minutes, you have collected enough to feed the group tonight and possibly into tomorrow. But the work is also the teaching. Your aunt knows these plants in a way that goes beyond simple recognition. She knows their stories. The stories are how the knowledge is held and how it is passed on. As she is telling your cousin about a time her own grandmother nearly lost several people to a root that looks almost identical to the one they are collecting now, differing only in the number of veins in the leaf. 3 veins, safe. 5 veins, and you stop breathing within hours. This is education, but nothing like a classroom. It is survival knowledge passed forward through story and demonstration and repetition across years of shared experience. Your cousin will absorb hundreds of lessons like this one before she is grown. By the time she is your age, she will know perhaps 300 plant species by sight, by season, by location. She will know when to harvest each one and how to prepare it, and what it will do to a person who gets it wrong. Modern botanists spend years at university building that kind of knowledge. Your ancestors built it by necessity, beginning in early childhood, because the cost of not knowing could be fatal. The group moves on. You wade through a shallow stream, the cold water sharp against your legs. On the far bank, your aunt spots something that brings a genuine smile to her face. Mushrooms growing from a fallen log. She approaches carefully and examines them from several angles, even lifting one to smell it. Mushrooms are complicated. Some are genuinely good to eat. Some will make you violently ill. A handful will kill you. She picks 3 and leaves the rest. She is certain about these, but caution is always the right instinct. The rhythm of the day continues. Walking, observing, collecting. The child on your back has fallen asleep, lulled by the motion. Your baskets are getting heavier. Wild grapes are still slightly tart, but worth collecting. Seeds from a grass that will become something close to flower when ground back at camp. Bark from a specific tree that, when boiled, produces a tea that reduces fever. Your aunt collects the bark carefully, taking only what she needs, leaving the tree intact. She learned long ago that you think about next season, next year, the people who will come after you. This is sustainable harvesting, though no one has a phrase for it. It is simply understood that stripping a plant bare means it will not be there the next time you need it. The groups who grasped this survived long enough to pass the understanding forward. By early afternoon, you are miles from camp. Your legs are tired. Your shoulders ache under the weight of the baskets. But there is something almost meditative about the rhythm of this work. No urgency, no pressure, just the steady movement of walking and finding. The warmth of the sun on your skin. Birds calling somewhere above you in the canopy. Every sense is fully engaged. You are listening for animal movement. Watching for the glint of water that means a stream ahead. Smelling the air for smoke that might indicate another group camping nearby. Your younger cousin asks about the bush she has just spotted, covered in bright red berries. Are they safe? Your aunt does not simply answer. She walks over, looks carefully at the plant from several angles, and begins a story. How her own mother once found these same berries during a hard winter when other food had run out. How they sustained the group through 3 days of storm. How you have to cook them first, because birds can eat them safely, but they will cramp a human badly if eaten raw. The knowledge transfer continues. Every plant is a lesson. Every location carries memory. This landscape is not simply territory to your people. It is a library. Every tree and stone and bend in the stream holds information accumulated over generations. Your ancestors wrote nothing down, but they were not ignorant. They were living repositories of ecological knowledge, of a depth and precision that would rival anything a modern field scientist could compile. Late in the afternoon, the group turns back toward camp. The baskets are full. You have walked perhaps 8 miles. Your feet ache and your back is letting you know it, and the child has woken up and is restless. But you are satisfied in a way that is clean and uncomplicated. This was good work, important work. When you arrive at camp, there will be no particular fanfare. Nobody will mark your return the way they will mark a successful hunt. But everyone knows the reality. The hunters may well come back empty-handed tonight. They often do. You brought food. Reliable, nourishing, life-sustaining food. And tomorrow you will go out and do the same. This is the rhythm that kept humanity alive for hundreds of thousands of years. Not the dramatic moments, the steady, patient, knowledgeable work of knowing where to look and what to do with what you find. Here is something that may genuinely surprise you. Your ancestor probably was not hunting today, or yesterday, possibly not even this week. And we have inherited a picture of prehistoric life as a state of perpetual motion. Early humans rising each morning and immediately setting out to run down massive animals or face off against predators twice their size. It makes for vivid storytelling. But reality was far more strategic and far more patient than that. Hunting for early humans was not a daily routine. It was a periodic, high-stakes undertaking that demanded enormous preparation and considerable patience, and that failed, by most estimates, far more often than it succeeded. A successful hunt might happen every few days if circumstances were favorable, every few weeks if they were not. In between, you relied on gathering to keep everyone fed, and you spent time preparing, planning, observing, and waiting for the right conditions to align. But on the days when a hunt did happen, the experience was extraordinary. Say today is one of those days. The conditions have been building. Yesterday, scouts spotted fresh tracks from a small herd of antelope moving through a valley about 5 miles from camp. The animals are heading toward a seasonal water source, following patterns your people have observed and stored in memory across generations. The timing is right, the weather is clear, and several hunters are fit and available. This is how it begins. Not with impulse, but with deliberate consideration. A group comes together in the early morning. 6 men and 2 women, all experienced trackers. They discuss the approach using spoken language combined with hand signals refined over thousands of years of cooperative use. Positions, likely routes, contingencies if things go wrong. And their spears are each a significant piece of craftsmanship. The wooden shaft straightened and seasoned over months to prevent it warping. The stone point napped from high-quality flint, traded from a quarry 200 miles away, and arriving through a chain of exchanges that cross the landscape. The point is fixed to the shaft, with plant resin and sinew that has been processed and dried into a bond that modern materials would struggle to match. Some of the hunters also carry atlatls, spear-throwing devices that use mechanical leverage to roughly triple the velocity and distance of a thrown weapon. This technology is relatively recent in your time, perhaps only a few thousand years old in your part of the world, but it has changed hunting profoundly, in the same way the bow will change it again thousands of years from now. The group moves out, and the first thing you would notice if you were watching them is that they are not running. There is no urgency in their pace. They move at a steady, sustainable rate, reading the ground as they go. One of the trackers stops and kneels beside a shallow depression in the sand. He studies it for a long moment, then signals to the others. The track is fresh, almost certainly from this morning. The depth tells him the animal was walking, not fleeing. The spacing between prints gives him its approximate size and age. A young adult, healthy, good weight. He can extract all of that from a single hoof impression. This is not intuition in any mystical sense. It is pattern recognition honed across a lifetime of attention, with additional layers of understanding absorbed from parents and elders before that. The group follows the trail for hours at that measured pace, stopping periodically to reassess, adjusting their route as the signs develop. This is the part of hunting that no retelling quite captures. The long, patient reading of signs that requires mental endurance more than physical strength. Around midday, they spot the herd. 8 antelope grazing in a shallow valley near a pool of standing water. The decision is made quickly among the group. They will not attempt a close-range ambush. They will do what humans, uniquely among all large predators, are supremely equipped to do. They will run them down. Here is the extraordinary biological reality that made early humans terrifying as hunters, despite being slow over short distances. A healthy antelope can reach speeds of 50 miles per hour in a sprint. A human peaks at roughly 15. In a brief race, there is no contest. But sustained over hours in midday heat, the calculation reverses entirely. Most large animals are covered in fur and cool themselves primarily through panting, which requires them to stop running. Continue at high speed, and the animal literally overheats. A human body, nearly hairless and capable of sweating across its entire surface, can shed heat continuously while running. We can chase prey for hours in conditions that would shut down any fur-covered animal's cooling system. The hunters spread out and begin to move toward the herd at a steady jog, not a sprint, a pace they can maintain. The antelope bolt immediately, gone in seconds over the ridge. The humans do not stop. They follow the tracks at the same patient pace, maintaining pressure. An hour passes, then 2. The sun is intense now. Most predators would have given up and found shade long ago. The hunters keep going, rotating who runs at the front, so that each person gets brief recovery time, while others maintain the chase. They find the herd again. The animals run, but their behavior is changing. They are breathing hard. Their coordination is beginning to lose its sharpness. The chase continues. 3 hours. 4. Eventually, one animal separates from the others, its movements becoming unsteady, its body struggling to function as the heat accumulates faster than it can be released. A hunter closes the distance. The spear flies true. And then it is over. The hunters stand around the fallen animal, and the first thing that happens is not celebration. It is acknowledgement. We cannot know the exact form this took, but multiple lines of evidence suggest that early humans performed some kind of ritual around a successful kill. Something that recognized the animal as more than an object, that marked what had just occurred as significant. Then comes the practical work, and the butchering of an animal this size is itself a form of expert knowledge. These hunters understand animal anatomy in a way that most people today never will. Every muscle group, every organ, every material with uses beyond food. The hide comes off in one piece, valuable for clothing and shelter. The best cuts are separated. Organs that spoil quickly are set aside to be prepared and eaten here rather than carried back. Nothing is wasted. Eventually, even the bones will be cracked for their marrow, one of the most calorie-dense foods available. But there is a practical problem. Here they are 5 miles from camp with several 100 pounds of food and raw materials, and they cannot carry it all at once. Leave it unattended, and lions and hyenas and vultures will have stripped it within hours. So 2 runners go back to camp at full speed to bring help. The rest stay with the kill, building a fire to push back the scavengers and beginning to smoke some of the meat for preservation. When the additional people arrive from camp, it becomes a communal operation. Everyone participates in carrying the harvest home. The return is a celebration. Successful hunts are rare enough to be genuine social events. There will be a proper meal tonight, and stories around the fire, and probably music and dancing. The hunters will describe the chase in detail, and in the retelling it will become part of the group's shared memory. And another account to draw on when teaching young people about patience and coordination, and how to read an animal that is beginning to overheat. But let us be clear about something. This does not happen every day. Between moments like this one, there are many more hunts that come to nothing. Tracks that lead nowhere. Animals too alert to approach. Someone gets an injury that forces the group to abandon the attempt. Weather shifts at the wrong moment. Hunting was absolutely important. It provided concentrated protein and fat that gathering alone could not match. The cooperation it required built and maintained the social bonds that held the group together. The skills it demanded drove the development of language, strategic thinking, and the ability to coordinate complex activity. But hunting was never the primary source of daily calories. And that belonged to gathering, which happened every day and did not require risking anyone's life. Hunting was the high-stakes occasion that sometimes yielded extraordinary results. What made early humans successful was not that they were the best hunters. It was that they were good enough at hunting while also being excellent at everything else. Gathering, crafting tools, cooperating with one another, adapting to new environments and new conditions. The hunt, when it succeeded, was a spectacular thread in a much larger fabric. Tomorrow, whether today's attempt succeeded or failed, there would still be roots to dig up and nuts to collect, tools to repair, children to watch. When the patient daily work of staying alive in a world that was beautiful and abundant, and occasionally willing to reward those who were clever and persistent and willing to work together. The antelope is gone now, converted into food and clothing and tools, but the knowledge of how it was taken will travel forward, passed from this generation into the next, refined and enriched with each retelling until it becomes not just strategy, but culture. By midday, the camp was alive with a sound that would have been immediately recognizable to any craftsperson across all of human history. The soft, rhythmic tap of stone striking stone. Not loud, not aggressive, just steady and purposeful. The sound of someone making a thing that did not exist before. Your aunt was seated on a flat rock near the central fire, a hammerstone in one hand and a piece of flint in the other. Every few seconds, she would bring the hammerstone against the flint at a precise angle, and a small flake would spin off into the dust at her feet. Around her, a scatter of discarded pieces and earlier attempts. Archaeological debris that would still be readable 40,000 years later by people who had learned to interpret stone. This was not occasional activity. It was daily maintenance, as necessary as eating or tending the fire, because tools did not last. A spear point chipped when it struck bone during yesterday's hunt. The scraper used to work that hide last week has a dull edge now, almost useless. In a world without metal, without anything being mass-produced, without the option of simply acquiring a replacement, you made your tools or you found yourself without them. But stone tool-making, the craft archaeologists call knapping, was not something you could simply pick up in an afternoon. It was a skill that took years to develop, built on an understanding of stone that approached genuine intimacy. Different rocks fractured according to different rules. Flint was predictable. Obsidian took an edge sharper than almost anything else but would shatter with impact. Chert was reliable, but more resistant. You needed to know where to find quality stone, how to test it before committing hours to working it, how to identify the internal faults that would cause it to crack in the wrong direction. Watching your aunt work, you would see knowledge earned across a lifetime. She was not simply hitting rocks together. She was reading the stone, perceiving lines of potential fracture that were invisible to anyone who had not spent decades learning how to look. Each strike was a calculation. Too much force, and the whole piece shatters. Too little, and nothing happens. The angle had to be precise, the point of contact chosen deliberately. This was geometry and physics executed entirely through accumulated intuition and the memory held in muscle and bone. The process was called the prepared core technique, and it represented centuries of accumulated refinement. Your aunt had spent the past hour shaping this piece of flint, removing flakes methodically to create a core with exactly the right proportions. Now she was ready. One well-placed strike, and a long, thin blade detached from the core, sharp enough to slice through hide or meat with minimal pressure. She examined it carefully, running her thumb along the edge, then gave a small nod. Good enough. But not finished. The blade needed hafting, fastening to a handle that would make it actually functional. Here is where craftsmanship became something closer to art. She had prepared the wooden handle earlier, a piece of hardwood with a slot carved into one end. Now she drew out a small leather pouch containing pine resin collected earlier and then heated until it became adhesive, mixed with a little powdered charcoal and ground bone for strength. This was the Paleolithic equivalent of structural adhesive. To watch her work was to watch someone for whom each step had been performed thousands of times and required no conscious thought. Heat the resin near the fire. Apply it to the slot in the handle. Position the blade exactly. To wrap the joint with thin strips of sinew that would shrink and grip as they dried. The whole process took perhaps 10 minutes, but it drew on decades of personal experience and generations of knowledge that had been passed forward before her. Nearby, her brother was working through a different problem. He had a piece of antler from the deer killed 3 days ago and was patiently, carefully carving it into a spear point. This was different work from knapping stone. Antler was organic and flexible, capable of absorbing impacts that would shatter flint. But it was also harder to shape, requiring different tools and different techniques. He was using a stone burin, a chisel-like implement, to scrape and carve the antler down by degrees. The work was slow, producing a soft, continuous scraping sound that wove through the rhythm of his sister's napping. Thin curls of antler accumulated beside him with each stroke. Every few minutes he would pause and test the emerging point against his thumb, checking its sharpness and its balance. This point would be different from the stone-tipped weapons most hunters carried. Lighter, more forgiving on impact, capable of being thrown somewhat further. But it took a significant commitment of time to make, and antler was only available when a deer had been successfully hunted. Stone was everywhere. Antler was precious. You used it thoughtfully, for specific purposes, and you made sure people knew who had made what. Because here is something the archaeological record has only recently begun to reveal clearly. The Paleolithic craftspeople took genuine pride in their work. The evidence is in objects that are more beautiful than they needed to be. Stone points shaped with perfect bilateral symmetry, even though a less symmetrical point would work just as well. Bone needles decorated with tiny incised patterns. Antler spear throwers carved into animal forms with visible care and skill. You do not decorate something that serves a purely functional purpose unless aesthetics matter to you, unless you want your work to be recognizable, to be noticed, to carry something of yourself forward in the world. Her brother's finished spear point would be efficient, certainly, but it would also be beautiful. Because when you carried it into the field, when you used it to feed the people you were responsible for, you wanted everyone to know who had made it. Status, identity, and reputation were all conveyed through what your hands could do. Across the camp, 3 women were working on something equally essential: clothing. One was scraping a deer hide stretched tight on a wooden frame, using a stone scraper to remove every trace of fat and membrane from the inner surface. Her hands moved in steady, overlapping strokes, the sound carrying across the camp. This was not quick work. A single hide could require hours of scraping, and even then, the process was far from over. The hide had to be treated, either smoked over a low fire or worked repeatedly with a mixture of the animal's own brain tissue and rendered fat, a combination that prevented the skin from stiffening as it dried. Brain tanning was chemistry without a laboratory, developed through centuries of observation and trial. Someone, at some point in the distant past, had discovered that brain tissue contained exactly the right compounds to preserve leather. Perhaps through accident, perhaps through systematic experimentation. Either way, the knowledge had been transmitted across generations in an unbroken chain. Nearby, her sister was working on a hide that had already been treated. She had a bone awl, a sharp-pointed tool for piercing, and was methodically creating a garment, puncturing holes and drawing thin sinew through them in sequence. The stitching looked rough by current standards, but was surprisingly effective. These clothes would be warm, durable, and flexible, and they would last for seasons, possibly years. A third woman nearby was doing something that would have been impossible to earlier humans, and that represented a genuine technological leap. She was sewing with an actual needle, a small bone implement with a drilled eye at one end, threaded with sinew. Needles of this kind appear in the archaeological record roughly 20,000 years ago. Their arrival changed clothing production permanently. With needles, you could make garments that fit individual bodies, that could be layered and tailored, that could be decorated with sewn-on beads or panels of differently colored leather. She was making winter clothing for her daughter, fur-lined and structured to trap warmth, designed to keep the child alive through cold that would arrive in a few months. The little girl sat beside her and watched with the total absorption of a child who knows she is seeing something important. This was how the knowledge traveled, not through formal instruction, but through years of close observation, followed by imitation, followed by practice, followed by correction. By the time the girl was 10, she would be competent at basic leatherwork. By 20, she might be among the most skilled in the group. Toward the far edge of camp, an older man was working on something smaller and more delicate. He had a collection of shells acquired in trade the previous summer, when a group from the coast had visited. Now he was drilling small holes through them using a stone drill, a slow process that demanded steady hands and real patience. These would be strung on plant fiber cord to make necklaces or bracelets, purely decorative. Nobody needed jewelry to stay alive, but humans had been making it for at least 100,000 years, probably longer, and because survival was never the only thing that mattered. Those shells said things that did not need to be spoken, that the person wearing them had connections reaching to the coast, that they had time and inclination to make something beautiful, that they valued beauty as a category. All of it communicated through pierced shells threaded on a cord. What is striking about all this activity, taken together, is the degree of specialization it reveals. Not everyone was equally skilled at everything. Your aunt had spent decades mastering stonework and had become a genuine expert. Her brother was talented with antler and bone, but only adequate at knapping flint. The woman making the winter clothing was the best leather worker in the group, and when her skills were needed, others contributed food or assistance in return. This was not exactly a market economy, but it was something close, a recognition that different people had different capacities, and that the group was better served when people developed those capacities rather than all doing everything to the same mediocre standard. It was also the foundation for something that would become increasingly important as human societies grew more complex: status and influence that derived from skill rather than from physical strength alone. The best tool maker, the most accomplished leather worker, the person whose knowledge of plants was deepest, all of them carried a kind of authority that did not depend on being the biggest or most physically capable member of the group. And everywhere, children watched. And a boy of perhaps 8 had settled near your aunt and was attempting to replicate her movements with his own small stones. Most of his attempts produced nothing useful, but she encouraged him gently. Occasionally, she would reach over and guide his hand, showing him the correct angle, the right amount of force. By the time he was 15, he might be functional at basic tool making. By 25, if the talent was there and he worked at it, he might be skilled enough to teach others in turn. And the knowledge would move forward another generation, each one adding small refinements, tiny improvements that would accumulate over centuries into changes so significant they would look, in retrospect, like revolutions. The afternoon sun moved across the sky, and the sounds of making continued. Tapping and scraping, the crackle of fire, voices, the occasional laugh, building the material culture that made human life possible one careful stroke at a time. If you picture early humans as perpetually exhausted, barely fed figures grinding through every hour of the day in desperate pursuit of survival, you are not alone. That image has been repeated so often and so confidently that most people simply absorbed it without question. Life before civilization, we have been told, was nasty, brutish, and short. A relentless, joyless scramble from first light to last, with nothing left over for anything else. But when anthropologists actually began spending time with contemporary hunter-gatherer communities and carefully recording how people distributed their hours, a very different picture appeared. On average, adults in many foraging societies spend somewhere around 4 to 6 hours a day on what we would classify as work. Securing food, preparing it, maintaining tools and the living space. The remaining hours of the day do not get filled with more frantic effort. They get filled with nothing in particular. Rest, conversation, play, music, grooming, watching the world go by, simply existing alongside other people without any agenda attached. If you were to plot a Paleolithic day on the kind of schedule a modern corporate manager might recognize, it would be deeply confusing to them. Yes, there are periods of real intensity, tracking an animal for hours across difficult terrain, carrying heavy loads back to camp, shaping stone tools with the kind of precise attention that is genuinely tiring. But these periods are surrounded by long stretches of open, unhurried time. Time that shapes itself around the body's energy, the feel of the weather, the mood moving through the group. So what did people actually do with those hours? A great deal of it would look both familiar and strangely slow. You rest, perhaps lying on your side in a patch of shade, half listening to the voices of the people around you, not quite asleep, but not doing anything in particular either. Perhaps sitting near the fire and absently turning a smooth stone in your fingers while watching the smoke climb in lazy spirals. When your body is the primary tool you have, preserving it is not laziness. It is maintenance. It is part of the work. You talk. Conversation inside a small band of 20 or 30 people is not background noise. It is the connective tissue that holds the group together. Talk about which direction the animal herd seemed to be moving. Talk about who found an unexpectedly good stand of roots. Talk about the disagreement 2 nights ago and how it got resolved. These are not trivial exchanges. They are information networks and conflict management and emotional support all operating simultaneously. You spend time with the children. You let them use you as a climbing structure. You show a small person how to throw a stick at a target, or how to hold a piece of stone without cutting themselves. Their games look like chaos, but they are doing serious work, rehearsing adulthood, testing the boundaries of coordination and risk and trust and social interaction. For long stretches of the day, there is simply no pressing agenda, no scheduled tick-tocking along. There's no sense of time being wasted because nothing is currently being produced. The pace is determined by the long, slow cycles of sun and season and the movements of animals. not by a dial. And then somewhere inside all of that open time, something else begins to emerge. Humans start inventing things that serve no survival function at all. Archaeologists have found small objects at prehistoric sites that resist classification as tools or weapons. Tiny carved animals in bone or antler. Smooth-shaped stones with a hole drilled through the center. Small figurines of people, sometimes exaggerated in ways that seem deliberate and strange. For a hungry adult crouching by a fire, these objects would not do much. But for a child, they are toys. A small hand trying to spin a stone disc on the hard ground. Two children mock hunting with miniature spears made from twigs. A parent nearby, half engaged, letting them help with something that does not really require their help. Play is not a distraction from real life. It is real life. Through play, children learn to aim, to negotiate, to give and receive, to lead and to follow. There are hints of adult games, too. Certain small stones and bones found together in arrangements that suggest counters or dice. Etched lines on flat rock faces that may have been boards on which pieces were moved back and forth in quiet competitions that passed time and reinforced social bonds. We cannot know what rules they used or what they played for, but the impulse is unmistakable. When immediate needs are met, the human mind reaches for patterns, for challenges, for small contained puzzles to work through. Games are structured daydreams, and early humans appear to have had abundant time for them. And then there is music. In caves in Europe, archaeologists have recovered delicate flutes carved from the hollow wing bones of birds and from mammoth ivory. Some of these instruments are more than 40,000 years old. They are not rough noisemakers. Some have carefully positioned holes that produce recognizable intervals. Someone sat down and experimented over many sessions, adjusting each hole a little, listening to the result, learning how to shape a piece of bone into a working musical instrument. Picture the first time someone in your band brings a flute out after dark. The sky has gone fully dark. The stars are out. The fire has settled to a low, steady glow. They lift it to their lips, and a clear, unusual sound rises above the crackle of the fire and the murmur of voices. Everyone stops for a moment. Then the notes come again, uncertain at first, then more confident. Someone begins clapping a rhythm against their thigh. Another person taps a stick on a section of log. Feet begin to move. Bodies begin to sway. A camp that was settling down for the night is suddenly alive. Music and movement are more than entertainment. When bodies synchronize, when breath and rhythm and motion align across a group, something measurable happens in the brain. Anxiety decreases. Group identity strengthens. The sense that the world is, for this moment, coherent and manageable. In small, vulnerable groups of early humans, those shared moments of rhythm may have been as functionally important as any weapon or shelter. That after the movement comes the other great technology of leisure: stories. The fire has settled. The night is quiet. A few last sparks drift upward. People have pulled closer to the warmth. The best talker in the band begins. The story might be about the hunt that almost went wrong last season. It might be about the time the river rose unexpectedly and the group had to relocate camp before dawn. It might be about an animal that tricks the others, or a spirit that lives in the storm clouds, or an ancestor who did something brave and foolish and necessary a long time ago. Some of these stories are accounts of real events. Others reach out into myth and imagination. but all of them carry something. A warning, a piece of strategy embedded in narrative, a memory of who did what and why it mattered. In a world without any written record, stories are the memory of the group. They hold information across years and generations. Where to find reliable water in a dry season, which plant preparation can prevent fever, and which can cause death. What happened the last time a particular social boundary was crossed? Lying by the fire, half listening, half drifting, you are not simply being entertained. You are being prepared, slowly and gently, for the rest of your life. Between the stories and the music, there is grooming. If you have spent time watching primates, you have seen it. One animal carefully working through another's coat, removing parasites and debris with complete concentration. It looks meticulous and even fussy, but it serves two purposes simultaneously: hygiene and the reinforcement of social bonds. Early humans did the same thing, not with different materials, but the same basic function. You sit with your back to someone and let them work through your hair with their fingers or a simple comb of bone or wood. They remove what should be removed and work quietly and carefully and close. The contact says, without any words at all, "You matter to me. I am paying attention to you." Then comes decoration. Red ochre, an iron-rich mineral that occurs naturally across much of the world, appears at human sites going back hundreds of thousands of years. It is ground to powder, mixed with fat or water, and applied to skin, to hair, to tools, to hides. Whether it was sunscreen or insect deterrent, or symbolic body paint, or all three at once, is genuinely uncertain. You sit while someone traces lines along your face and arms and chest. And perhaps they are marking membership in a particular group. Perhaps they are indicating a role in a ceremony or the completion of something significant. Hair is braided or shaped. Simple jewelry made from shells or carved bone or animal teeth is worn. These acts take time. They are not necessary for staying alive, but they are part of the transformation of bare survival into a life that has identity and beauty and meaning woven through it. And woven through all of this, the talking and playing and making music and decorating and telling stories are long passages of something that many people in the modern world have almost entirely lost the capacity for. Just watching. You lie on your back and follow the shapes of clouds moving across the sky. You sit still and trace the path of a line of ants carrying food back to their nest. Plus, you stand at the edge of the camp and watch a herd of animals grazing across the valley in the distance, noticing the way they cluster and scatter, the way the wind shifts their behavior. You observe the constellations rising and setting, the pattern of the moon across its cycle. To a contemporary observer, this might register as boredom, but for your ancestors, this quiet and sustained watching is part of how a mental model of the world is built. It trains attention. It sharpens the kind of low-level intuition that does not announce itself, but consistently produces correct answers. The person who has spent hundreds of evenings quietly reading the sky might be the first to notice an unusual cloud formation that signals an approaching storm. And the child who follows animal tracks for the pure pleasure of it may become the most capable tracker in the group, without anyone ever sitting down to formally teach them. And beneath all of this, there is something that is harder to name, but that matters. When there are no glowing screens, no text to read, no background soundtrack piped in from a distance, silence and stillness do not feel empty. They feel full, full of the hum of insects, and the calls of birds and wind moving through grass, and the faint sound of water somewhere below the ridge, and the breathing of people you love close by. In that fullness, the boundary between you and the world around you feels thinner than it usually does. You are not a separate mind enclosed in a schedule, glancing out at nature through a window on a rare day off. You are an animal in an environment, embedded in it, responsive to it, shaped by it from the inside out. So the day of an early human 40,000 years ago is not a gray, unbroken march of toil. It is a pattern of effort and ease, focused work and wandering leisure. Hunting, gathering, crafting, yes, but also laughing, singing, moving together in rhythm, caring for one another's bodies and hair, marking one another with pigment, passing stories around a fire, watching clouds, watching stars. Their lives carried dangers ours usually do not. Illness and injury and hunger were always nearby. But they also had something that has become genuinely rare in many modern lives. Long, unbroken stretches of time in which nothing urgent had to happen. Time for the mind to drift. Time to be with others without anything attached to it. Time to simply be awake inside a living world. And as the fire dims and the last story fades into the warmth of the night, that spaciousness follows you down into sleep. Tomorrow, there will be work again. But there will also be music and laughter, and the slow, quiet practice of being human. Let us pull back now and look at the whole shape of this ordinary day. 40,000 years ago, you are not making your way through the world alone. You live inside a band, not a village, not a city. A small, intimate human world of perhaps 20, 30, 40 people. Rarely more than 50. A group small enough that you know every voice, every footfall in the dark, every characteristic cough. You can tell from the particular sound of someone's walk who is approaching before you can see them. This was not accidental. It was the size that natural selection, practical necessity, and accumulated cultural understanding had all converged on. Too small, and the group cannot defend itself adequately, cannot share enough skills, cannot sustain the marriage alliances that keep the gene pool healthy. Too large, and the arrangement becomes unstable. Too many competing interests, too many mouths to feed. Too difficult to move as a single unit when the landscape demands it. So your people have arrived at something like an optimal size. A social world you can hold entirely in your mind. One in which every relationship has texture and history, where you know who can be trusted and who bears watching, whose generosity is reliable and whose is conditional, who will come through in a crisis, and who has a pattern of disappearing when things get hard. And these internal maps of the people around you are as important to your survival as any tool you carry. Where there are relationships, there is friction. Not formal disputes with arbitration, not systems of law, but the ordinary, everyday frictions of people living in close, inescapable proximity. Someone took more than their share of the meat after the last hunt. Someone said something that cut someone else in a way that is still sitting there 3 days later. Someone skipped a turn tending the fire 2 nights running. In a group this size, there is no walking away from it. The person you are in conflict with is sleeping 10 feet from you tonight. So, how do you maintain the peace without any of the formal mechanisms modern societies depend on? You use the tools that are actually as old as or older than civilization. Gossip, reputation, and the slow pressure of collective attention. Gossip in this context is not idle entertainment. It is the operating system of social order. When two hunters disagree about who wounded the deer first, and the argument gets heated, people notice. The story circulates around the fire that evening, gets retold and refined. By the time it has completed its rounds, everyone knows how each of them behaved, who was fair-minded, who was defensive, who eventually came around. Nothing is written down anywhere, but nothing is forgotten. If someone consistently takes more than their share, that becomes part of their story. When resources tighten, people remember. If someone is genuinely brave, or patient with the children of others, or generous when a neighbor came back from a bad hunt, that becomes part of their story too. And these accumulated reputations determine who gets help when help is needed, who is trusted with consequential decisions, who is included in serious conversations. For larger conflicts, there are no courts. There are elders. The woman in her 60s, who has watched 100 arguments about food and partnership and territory, and knows how each kind of dispute tends to move, if handled well or poorly. The man who remembers the last time something similar nearly fractured the group, and what it cost everyone. They are not judges in any formal sense, but when tempers are sharp, people turn to them. They speak slowly. They bring in history and context. They remind people of past hardship and past kindness. Mediation is a survival strategy. A genuine feud inside a band of 30 people can be lethal. Split the group into two hostile factions, and each half is suddenly too small to protect itself, too weak to cover the range it needs, too vulnerable to the next hard winter. The entire social architecture is quietly tilted toward reconciliation. People tease rather than accuse directly. Complaints get expressed sideways. Songs can be sung that make a point about someone's behavior without naming names. This indirect approach is not weakness. It is a finely calibrated social tool that allows people to apply real pressure while leaving everyone a way back that does not require them to surrender their dignity publicly. Underneath all of these social mechanisms, there is a truth that is so basic, it is almost invisible. Your survival is not individual. It never was. That reality shapes everything from the first breath. When you are born into a band, you are born into a web of care that extends well beyond your immediate parents. Your mother and father matter enormously, but so do your grandparents, your aunts and uncles, your older siblings and cousins, and even adults with no blood connection who have simply become part of the circle through years of shared difficulty and shared life. In the language of current anthropology, this is cooperative breeding. In the language of your ancestors, it is simply how things work. Your mother might be out gathering with a younger child strapped to her back, miles from camp. Someone else keeps you entertained, corrects you, feeds you when you are hungry, comforts you when you fall. A grandmother hums a rhythmic phrase while braiding cord, and your brain quietly absorbs the sounds of your language. An uncle shows you where the antlion traps are hidden in the sand, which plants sting and which do not. You absorb knowledge from a whole village of minds simultaneously. And this arrangement provides a safety net that makes the band far more resilient than any single family could be on its own. If a parent is lost to illness or injury or accident, the child does not automatically go with them. There are other adults whose investment in that child is genuine and deep. That redundancy, multiple people caring for the same young ones, is woven invisibly through early human life and may be among the most significant of our evolved social features. Partnerships between adults in this world were probably more varied in their structure than the single standard model we tend to assume. Different environments, different cultural traditions, and different population pressures likely produced different arrangements across groups and across time. Some communities may have built their lives around stable long-term pair bonds, partners raising children across many seasons. Others may have had more fluid arrangements, partnerships forming and restructuring as circumstances changed. Some situations may have given rise to what we would call polygynous arrangements, others to patterns we would describe as polyandrous, particularly in environments where resource pooling among several partners offered real survival advantages. The specific form varied. What remained constant across all of them was the need to manage jealousy and obligation, to ensure that children were fed and protected, and to keep the social fabric intact. Formal prohibitions, joking relationships, and unspoken but widely understood rules about who could approach whom and under what circumstances all evolved to handle this navigation. Who owes whom what and in what form? Who can discuss what in public without causing trouble? These invisible traffic patterns guided everyone through the complicated territory where desire, loyalty, and responsibility all intersect. And the band itself was not the whole of the social world. Beyond the circle of familiar faces around your fire, there were other bands, other groups speaking similar languages or related dialects, connected to you by distant kinship, by old alliances, or simply by the habit of periodic contact across many seasons. You might encounter them only a few times a year, but those encounters were among the most important events in the social calendar. You imagine late summer or the end of a dry season, when one particular valley holds an unusual abundance. Herds have gathered, the fish are running heavily, the fruit trees are laden. Word spreads through the network of contacts, not through any formal system of communication, but through the chains of casual encounter that link the landscape together. A hunter meets members of another group and mentions where the game is thick. A visiting cousin passes along news of a river full of fish. Slowly and without coordination, bands converge. These seasonal gatherings are your version of a festival. Trade moves through them. Someone from a coastal group brings dried fish and shells. Someone from the mountains carries obsidian, exceptionally sharp volcanic glass, suitable for blades. Others have ochre, cured hides, carved tools of bone. Objects travel hundreds of miles through these chains of exchange, each one carrying with it a story of where it came from. And these meetings are where young people from different bands encounter potential partners from outside their own group. If your band has 30 people, you cannot sustain generation after generation of pairing entirely within that circle. The genetic consequences would accumulate quietly but seriously over time. So alliances with other bands provide both partners and genetic diversity. Some young people return home with someone from outside. Others leave their birth group permanently, joining a new one. In the language of modern genetics, this is population-level adaptive behavior. For your ancestors, it is simply life continuing to move. These gatherings are also where information spreads most rapidly. A new technique for securing stone points more reliably. A valley where the winter is consistently less punishing. A new predator moving through a region where it was not seen before. Knowledge ripples outward through these networks, the way water moves from a dropped stone carried in human memory across the landscape. All of this depends on the one adaptation that made everything else possible: language. Not signals and simple vocalizations, but the full, layered, combinatorial capacity for speech that allows you to say not just there and lion, but something like, last dry season, when the river was lower than usual, 3 lions came from the ravine on the eastern face of that hill, so avoid camping there with small children during low water. The ability to communicate strategies, explain myths, share dreams, and make and receive jokes, and give and receive laments. By 40,000 years ago, your ancestors almost certainly possessed languages that were as fully capable as any spoken today. Different in vocabulary and rhythm, but identical in the underlying cognitive machinery: syntax, tense, metaphor, the whole apparatus. Language lets the group coordinate complex hunts. It lets elders tell children about dangers no one in the current group has ever personally encountered. It lets news of a drought or a flood in the adjacent territory reach you before you are already in its path. And at night, lying half asleep by the fire, it lets you drift on the current of a slowly unfolding story. In this social world, old age is not a burden. It is an asset. A body that has been through 60 years of physical life in this landscape cannot do everything it once did. Joints that have absorbed that much movement carry wear. Vision and hands that have served for so long show the marks of it. But a mind that has been accumulating specific knowledge for 60 years is something else entirely. That elder who can no longer sprint after a deer can still tell you which star formations mark the change of seasons with precision enough to plan around. The grandmother who no longer ranges far from camp remembers which plant reduces a fever, and which one will kill the person you give it to. The old man who could outrun everyone in the group 30 years ago now carries inside him the memory of what the landscape looked like during the flood year, which animals fled, in which direction, and which ground stayed safe. When a child runs a high fever, the elders recall the last time this happened and what helped. When distant smoke suggests a fire moving through the forest, they remember the last burn and can tell you what to expect. They are walking archives of famine and abundance, of flood years and dry ones, of conflicts that eventually healed, and some that did not. In a world without any written record, the loss of an elder to sudden illness or accident is something close to a library burning. Which brings us to death itself. People died young by our standards. Infection, injury, the dangers of childbirth, accidents in the field, falls from height. But what the archaeological record makes striking is not simply the fact of death, it is the response to it. We find graves, not bodies dropped into convenient holes, and careful arrangements, skeletons positioned with deliberate intention, sometimes curled, sometimes extended. Many dusted with red ochre as if prepared for something. Buried alongside them, tools they used in life, jewelry they wore, pieces of food, teeth and bones of animals. In some Neanderthal sites, bodies appear to have been laid into pits that were then filled deliberately, and some evidence suggests flowers may have been placed with the dead. This is more than disposal. It points toward something beyond the practical. Whatever the specific beliefs held in any given group, whatever they understood to happen after death, death was clearly not treated as nothing. When someone dies in your camp, The ordinary flow of daily life breaks. Gathering is postponed. The fire burns differently. People sit closer to one another at night. Voices drop. Children ask questions that are difficult to answer. And the dead person's stories begin to circulate among the living. Their bravery and their generosity and their particular way of doing things all surfacing in conversation. All being held by the group for a while, before they slowly become part of the background of shared memory. The act of burying someone with care does something to those who remain. It binds them together in grief, in shared acknowledgement of loss, in the quiet question of what comes next. In this sense, social life and community are not pleasant additions to the core project of early human existence. They are the core project. Your ancestors did not survive because individual members were exceptionally strong or fast. They survived because they were embedded, deeply and permanently, in networks of care, of obligation, of shared knowledge, and of collective memory. Within that small circle of 20 to 50 faces, the faces you know better than you know anything else in the world, the entire human story is already moving forward. Cooperation and conflict, love and jealousy, wisdom and foolishness, arrival and loss. A tiny band carrying fire and tools and stories and genetic material across a landscape that is vast and indifferent and sometimes extraordinarily beautiful. As the sun drops toward the horizon and the day begins to give way, those bonds of community will shape everything that follows. How the group gathers, what is cooked and shared, what is sung, what is remembered, what is hoped for when the fire burns low and the night settles in. By the time the hunting and the gathering of the day have concluded, and when stomachs are mostly full and the fire has settled to a steady orange glow, something else tends to begin. Something that does not add calories or sharpen tools, but still feels, in some way that is difficult to name, essential. Your ancestors had a second job alongside staying alive. They had to make sense of being alive. Picture the entrance of the cave as the last light fails outside. Inside, the fire paints the walls in shifting amber and shadow. Someone picks up a piece of red ochre. Someone else unrolls a cord threaded with shell beads. In the half-dark, people begin to transform themselves and the space around them. To us, observed across the distance of 40,000 years, this looks like art and religion. To them, it was probably simply life, continuous with everything else they did. Let us begin with what is perhaps the most famous evidence of that inner world. Deep inside certain caves in Europe, far beyond the reach of daylight, far beyond any space used for sleeping or food storage, there are paintings, not sketches made casually near the entrance while waiting out rain. Some of the most extraordinary images in the Ice Age world appear hundreds of meters underground, in spaces you can only reach by crawling or climbing, in chambers where no natural light has ever fallen. Horses and bison and lions and woolly rhinoceroses and mammoths. Whole herds seeming to move across the stone as if the rock surface itself were alive. The artist chose the natural contours of the cave walls with evident care. A swelling in the limestone becomes the shoulder of a bison. An arch in the rock becomes the curve of a horse in motion. Some images are layered and shaded in ways that make them seem to shift when viewed by torchlight. This was not decoration. No one was living in those deep chambers. To produce these paintings, people had to gather torches and fuel and pigments and tools. They had to organize expeditions into absolute darkness. They had to know those passages well enough not to become lost in them. They chose these specific places deliberately, and then they filled them with images that, as far as we can determine, almost no one would ever see. Why? We do not know with certainty, but there are suggestions worth sitting with. One possibility is that these spaces served as teaching environments. Imagine hunters bringing adolescents into the cave, torches raised, pointing to painted herds while narrating the knowledge accumulated across generations. Where to aim your spear? How an injured animal moves differently from a healthy one. What season the bison passed through which valley. The cave walls become a kind of permanent three-dimensional record, a place of learning hidden inside the earth. Another possibility is ritual. In many traditional societies across the world, images of animals are not simply representations. They are instruments for influencing reality. To paint a successful hunt is, in some sense, to begin calling it into being. To honor the animal whose life you will take is to maintain the relationship that makes taking it permissible. Those painted bison may have been something closer to prayers than to pictures in any decorative sense, or the answer may be both at once. Teaching wrapped inside myth. Practical ecological knowledge encoded in sacred story. A ritual hunt, enacted in painted stone, that prepared the group for a real hunt at first light. And still the question returns. Why so deep? Why risk the genuine dangers of underground passages when a rock face in the open would serve the same purpose? Some researchers have proposed that those deep chambers were selected precisely because they severed connection to ordinary life. Underground, there is no sky, no horizon, no sound of wind or animal, no day and night. There is only stone and darkness and fire and voice and the contents of your own mind. That is an ideal setting for what many traditional cultures describe as altered states of awareness, the deliberate suspension of ordinary consciousness that opens other modes of experience. Which brings us to something that leaves no direct fossil, but that we can infer with reasonable confidence. Early spirituality. In many contemporary hunter-gatherer societies, there are figures whose role might be translated as shaman, individuals who use dance and chanting and fasting, and in some cases plant medicines to enter non-ordinary states of awareness, to make contact with ancestors or animal spirits, to seek understanding of illness or difficulty, to carry information back from wherever they went that might help the living. Whether something comparable existed 40,000 years ago cannot be proven, but the indirect evidence is consistent with it, and it would make a kind of sense to conduct such ceremonies deep underground, inside the body of the earth itself, cut off from the ordinary world. In those deep European caves, alongside and around the animal paintings, the archaeologists have found clusters of dots, lines, geometric shapes, ladder forms and zigzags, and series of repeated marks that do not depict anything recognizable. Some research suggests these marks correspond to visual patterns that appear reliably during trance states, the geometric phosphenies that emerge behind closed eyes when the nervous system shifts into altered modes. If that interpretation holds, then those cave walls are not only records of animals, they are records of interior experience, maps of what the human mind encountered when it traveled beyond its ordinary boundaries. While these underground ceremonies were happening in the darkness of deep caves, something else was taking place on the surface. The marking and decoration of the human body. Long before the famous cave paintings of Europe appeared, Could tens of thousands of years earlier, humans in Africa were grinding ochre to powder and mixing it with fat. They rubbed it onto skin. They applied it to tools and hides. At sites more than 100,000 years old, archaeologists have found pieces of ochre shaped and engraved with intention, alongside shells with holes worn smooth from long use against a cord or against skin stained with pigment, jewelry, necklaces and bracelets that may have jingled softly when the wearer moved or danced. Personal adornment might look like a minor detail against the backdrop of hunting mammoths and surviving winters, but it marks something profound. When you begin decorating your body with deliberate intention, you are communicating things that words might not carry on their own. And the color you wear, and the pattern you choose, and the specific objects hanging from a cord around your neck say things about who you are and where you belong. Married or available. Healer or hunter. Member of this group rather than that one. Those objects may have carried specific stories, too. A shell worn far inland speaks of connection to the coast, of trade or travel, or a remembered journey. A tooth from a dangerous animal might be a trophy, a way of making permanently visible the moment you faced something that could have killed you and did not. Ochre in burials, bodies dusted with red at the moment of their final placement in the earth, appears too consistently across too many cultures and too many thousands of years to be coincidental. Perhaps it invoked blood, or life, or the light of the setting sun. Or perhaps it was a protective gesture, meant to accompany the dead on whatever came next, or to make them visible to whatever attended the dead. Whatever specific meaning it carried, it clearly carried meaning. By roughly 35,000 years ago, this symbolic interior world has become more crowded and more various. Now there are small human figures, carved from bone and ivory and soft stone, found across an enormous geographic range stretching from France to Siberia. These are the figures sometimes called Venus figurines, though that name carries assumptions we probably should not press too hard. Many of them share a similar emphasis: rounded breasts, prominent hips and belly, a body that reads as pregnant or abundant. Faces are often barely suggested. Arms and feet are minimal, and the central focus is on the parts of the body associated with fertility and with the sustaining of life. What were they? Some researchers read them as fertility objects, held and kept by women hoping for healthy children. Others propose they represented a form of deity, something like a mother principle that embodied birth and nourishment and the great cycles of life coming in and going out. There is even a theory, not easy to dismiss, that some of them were made by pregnant women, looking down at their own bodies, seeing belly and breasts and hips, but not face or feet. We cannot confirm any of this. What we can say is that these figures demonstrate something important in its own right. People were thinking about themselves as symbols, not simply, here is a woman. But this small carved object stands for something larger than itself. For womanhood, for continuity, for the force that brings life forward. And the symbolic thinking did not stop with the human body. There are hints, only hints, but consistent ones, that some early humans were paying careful and sustained attention to the sky. Carved bones at various sites show series of marks that may correspond to lunar phases or to the seasonal events, migrations and ripening that shaped the year. Certain concentrations of animal images in caves seem, to some researchers, to align with star patterns visible at specific times of year. These interpretations remain contested, but it would not be surprising to find that early humans were tracking the sky systematically. When your survival depends on remembering when the herds move, when the salmon run, when certain plants are ready, you watch the patterns above you. You begin to notice that certain things in the sky correspond to certain things on the ground. Eventually, you might begin to suspect that the sky is a kind of record written in light of what the living world is about to do. And if the sky speaks, then perhaps the animals do too. For hunter-gatherer peoples across the world today, animals are rarely only prey. They are other kinds of beings with their own knowledge and their own purposes and their own relationships to the forces that govern existence. The bear who walks upright, the raven who is said to have brought certain knowledge to humans, the antelope who gave something valuable away. These stories carry moral instruction, ecological understanding, and navigational information woven together into forms the memory can hold. Your Paleolithic ancestors almost certainly experienced the world this way too. When they painted a running horse on limestone in absolute darkness, they may not have been making a picture in any sense we would recognize. They may have been invoking a presence, a kind of being that moved like a horse and knew what horses know and could, if treated with the right acknowledgement, bring good fortune or withhold it. To offend that presence might mean bad hunting for seasons to come. To honor it might mean abundance. The result is a world in which everything is alive with significance. Stone and water and tree and animal and cloud and star are all beings with stories and purposes and the capacity to affect the lives of the people who share the landscape with them. And in such a world, certain individuals would begin to stand out, and the ones who dream in unusual detail and remember what they dreamed, the ones who notice connections that others miss, the ones who can calm a frightened child with their voice alone, or bring relief to someone in pain through words and sound and touch. These might become the ones who go between, the shamans, or whatever the word was in whatever language your ancestors spoke. Imagine a night near the fire, the day's work settled. People sit in a loose circle, some working quietly at something with their hands, others half asleep. The one who goes between begins. A drum starts, maybe only a piece of stretched hide over a wooden frame, or a hollow section of log struck with a stick. The rhythm begins slowly, close to the pace of a resting heartbeat. Then it quickens. Voices rise and join it. Feet begin to move against the ground. And after a while, something shifts. You are not simply listening to the rhythm from outside it. You are inside it. Music is among the oldest of human technologies. Bone flutes made from birdwing bones. Wind instruments fashioned from hollow reindeer antler. Simple percussion that would leave nothing for archaeology to find. But that almost certainly reached as far back as language itself. In flickering firelight, rhythm and melody do something that goes well beyond entertainment. They dissolve, for a time, the boundaries that normally separate one person's experience from another's. When everyone moves together, breathes together, sounds together, the group becomes, for a while, a single thing. Anxiety contracts. The present moment expands. In those passages of shared rhythm, and the stories about animal spirits in the world beneath this one, and the ongoing attention of ancestors are not simply tales. They feel true because something is genuinely happening. a different mode of being in a mind that is being a body, surrounded by other minds and bodies doing the same thing. That is what early spirituality does at the social level. It is not only about explaining where thunder comes from or what happens when someone dies. It is about binding small, fragile collections of human beings into something cohesive enough to endure. Shared ceremony, shared symbols, shared songs. These are the adhesive that holds the group together when the food runs short and the danger comes close. And when you gather all of it together, the deep cave art, the ochre and beads, the carved figurines, the abstract marks, the music and the movement and the ceremonies, you have a portrait of early humans that bears almost no resemblance to the caricature we were given. By day, they tracked animals and shaped stone and dug roots and read the weather. By night, they stepped into a different dimension of experience, a world where the dead might be listening, where the sky carried messages, where animals had secret names, and the mountains remembered things that no living person had witnessed. They carried spears and sharp tools, but they also carried invisible things, myths and songs and rules and prohibitions and dreams. And when the fire finally burned itself low, and the last stories ended, and the ochre-marked hands were wiped clean against a hide, when the drums went quiet, and people stretched out on beds of dried grass and softened skin, they fell asleep in a universe they had helped to construct. A universe of meaning laid over the raw facts of cold and hunger and darkness. While they slept, the painted herds waited in the deep tunnels. The beads rested against skin that was warm with the memory of the fire. The carved figure lay beside someone's head. Above them, the stars continued their slow rotation, regardless of whether anyone was watching. By morning, the practical work would begin again. But that inner life, the songs and the symbols, and the persistent sense of forces moving through everything, never really ceased. It is still with us. The tools have changed completely. The wiring has not. As the night deepens over the Paleolithic camp, the last embers glow. Someone turns over in their sleep. A child murmurs and is gentled back to quiet. Somewhere outside, a wolf calls once and no one wakes. They have heard it 10,000 times. Tomorrow will bring more walking and more gathering and possibly another hunt. But right now, in the silence between the dying coals and the first hint of what will become dawn, the inner life of early humans rests. Not gone, just waiting, as it always has, to rise again with the light. And as that next day takes shape, we can follow them forward into what comes next. By late afternoon, the quality of the light changes. Shadows stretch and the colors drain slowly out of the landscape, and the temperature begins dropping faster than you expect. For people living 40,000 years ago, this is not primarily a visual experience. It is a signal, a quiet and consistent alarm that says, whatever still needs doing, finish it now. When the open landscape that was safe and readable in full daylight becomes something different as the light fails. Depth perception begins to collapse. The predators that spent the day lying in shade start to move. And so, your ancestors do something they have been doing every evening for as long as anyone can remember. They draw the world inward. They gather toward the thing that defines every human evening for at least 100,000 years. Fire. Not every group had reliable fire at every moment. During travel, it might be carried as ember rather than flame. Occasionally it was lost and had to be painstakingly remade. But for many late Paleolithic communities, fire was as central to evening as gravity. Not only a tool, a boundary. Inside the circle of warmth and light. Us. Outside it. The rest of everything. As the sun falls toward the horizon, people drift back toward camp. Gatherers return carrying wood alongside plants and food. Hunters arrive later, sometimes with meat and the particular quiet satisfaction of success, sometimes empty-handed and subdued, because the hunt went the way it often goes. Children who have ranged freely through the day tighten their radius, drawn in by the same pull that draws everyone else. The sounds shift. Daytime work is loud, physical, spread across distance. Evening is more gathered. You hear the steady crack of fresh wood on fire, the soft sound of someone completing a last task, the contained murmur of voices finding one another again. Before the real rest of the evening begins, there is one more piece of work that is as important as food: building a place to sleep. Beds sound like a luxury, but they are a survival technology. The ground is cold. It holds moisture. It is full of insects and parasites, and it pulls heat from a sleeping body through the night in ways that accumulate over weeks and months. So your ancestors build a barrier between themselves and the earth. Archaeologists have found compressed layers of dried grass and leaves and aromatic plants in ancient sleeping sites, laid down in thick mats and renewed repeatedly in the same location over time. A low-technology mattress whose principle is simple: trap air, shed water, put distance between the body and the cold. Someone clears the sleeping area of the worst stones and debris. A base layer of dry material goes down first. Grass, reeds, leaves, whatever traps air well. On top of that, softer material if available. And over all of it, where hides are available, skins from deer or antelope or larger game, hair side up for insulation, flesh side in. This is not individually owned furniture. The sleeping arrangement follows an internal social map that everyone understands. Parents close to children. Elders positioned where they can be assisted and protected. People in tension with one another, placed somewhere that reduces the chance of that tension flaring. These arrangements convey status and alliance and affection as clearly as words, without requiring anyone to say anything at all. While the sleeping area is being prepared at the edges, the evening meal is taking shape at the center. Throughout the day, people may have eaten when opportunity and hunger coincided, a handful of berries here, a cracked bone for marrow there. But the main accounting of the day's provisions tends to happen at nightfall, particularly when there was meat. Food is not simply consumed, it is transformed. Meat is roasted on sticks over the fire or placed in the coals. Bones are cracked for the dense, fatty marrow inside. Organs that will not keep through the night are cooked immediately. Plant foods are pounded, ground, peeled of whatever needs removing before they are safe to eat. Roots go into the ash. Someone keeps the fire at the right temperature. Someone else turns the skewers. Another person manages the timing. This is practiced choreography, and the sharing of what results is a social performance as much as a meal. Who receives the first portion? Who gets the best cuts? Does the person who made the kill keep the most? Or does the food move through the group according to custom? Elders first, children next, everyone else in turn. Different groups answered these questions differently, but almost all of them would have operated under one basic understanding. Consistent selfishness at the communal meal is noticed. It is remembered. And in a world where your survival depends on other people's willingness to share with you when your luck runs dry, your reputation at the fire is not a small thing. While hands work and food is distributed, conversation fills the air around the meal. During the day, communication was often practical and called across distance. At night, it drops in register and expands in content. The day is debriefed. A hunter describes quietly what happened in the valley, why the approach did not work, what was learned. A gatherer laughs about something unexpected encountered on the far side of the ridge. A small conflict from earlier in the day comes back up, is aired briefly, and the group moves to smooth it out, because carrying unresolved friction into tomorrow is a cost no one can afford. Planning moves through the conversation too. Whether to follow the herds north, when to make the move to the winter camp, who should scout the distant ridge before the whole group commits. These are not formal decisions made in formal settings, but patterns emerge. Some people's voices carry more weight. Others listen and signal agreement with a single well-placed word. Children absorb it all, learning not just practical information but the social grammar of how their group makes decisions, what counts as a compelling argument, when to speak and when to stay quiet. And then there are the stories. Once the acute edge of hunger has been addressed, and the fire is comfortable and the social frictions of the day have been smoothed, as well as they are going to be, the tone shifts again. Someone begins a story that most people present have heard before, because the best stories get told many times. A hunt that almost ended badly, and what was learned from the near disaster. The flood that drove the group to higher ground in the middle of the night. A clever animal that got away. A foolish one that did not. These stories are not entertainment in the casual sense. They are the group's memory made audible. They carry maps inside them. Which ground floods and when. Where the dangerous stone on the hillside path is hidden. What happens when you underestimate a particular kind of weather? See, wrapped around these facts are layers of embellishment and myth, because the embellishment is what makes the information unforgettable. The same fire that warms the evening meal also illuminates the sky immediately above the camp, where, if you step a little distance from the glow and let your eyes adjust, the stars are extraordinary. More than anyone raised near a modern city has probably ever seen. A sky so full of light that it looks almost solid in the darkest parts of the night, cut through by the long, pale band of the Milky Way. We cannot know the moment when a human being first looked up at that and wondered what it meant. But it would be strange if no one ever did. Before any of the constellations had the names we know now, people were almost certainly tracing shapes with their fingers and assigning them identities. A bright star might be the eye of a watching presence. The Milky Way might be the road the dead took after leaving this world. The moon in its phases might track the moods of something vast and unpredictable that you were better off keeping on your good side. These interpretations cannot be fossilized, but the human brain has not changed meaningfully since this time. Give people darkness, a sky full of patterns, and the need to make sense of a world in which random catastrophe is always possible, and they will build a cosmology. And that cosmology would shape behavior. When to move camp. When to attempt the long journey to the seasonal gathering place. When the timing feels right, and when it does not. Slowly, across many hundreds of nights of observation, a living calendar would form inside the collective mind of the group. Assembled from light no one could reach, but everyone could watch. But while eyes drift upward and thoughts wander far, the body is still here, in a place that is genuinely dangerous in the dark. Night in the Paleolithic world does not sleep. Beyond the firelight, predators are moving. Hyenas, lions, leopards, wolves. They smell the meat and hear the voices and feel the warmth. Most nights, a well-maintained fire and the concentrated presence of a human group are deterrent enough. But not every night. Fossil sites exist, where human bones carry the unmistakable marks of large carnivore teeth. Caves show evidence of alternating occupancy, humans in one season, large cats in another, the two never overlapping. So the watch continues through the night. Someone is always partially alert. Some people are simply built to sleep lightly. Others rotate the duty of wakefulness, tossing wood onto the fire at intervals, listening at the edge of the light for the sound that should not be there. The camp is positioned with this in mind. Dense vegetation has been cleared from the approach paths. Thorny brush has been piled at the places where the perimeter is most accessible. Sleeping bodies are clustered so that one person waking suddenly can bring others to alertness in moments. And sharing the vigil, in many late Paleolithic camps, there are the animals that chose, through some process we can only partially reconstruct, to stay near. The wolves that were slightly less afraid of humans than their companions were. The ones that hung at the edge of the firelight, taking scraps, and over generations, through that tolerance and that proximity, began to become something different. Something that would eventually be a dog. By 40,000 years ago, this process of gradual mutual adjustment appears to be underway in at least some parts of the world. These animals earn their place at the edge of the camp again and again at night. They hear things no human ear would catch. They smell predators at distances that are beyond human detection. A sudden growl or raised head or sharp bark is an early warning system woven directly into the sleeping group's awareness. And there is the warmth of them, their thick coats pressed against the bodies of sleeping children, their presence as reliable and reassuring in its own way as the fire. So the night has its layers, humans drifting toward sleep. The half-conscious adult who added one last branch to the fire and has not quite managed to fall back into full rest. When the animals shifting at the perimeter and their ears moving in directions the humans cannot see. Together they maintain a margin of safety in a world that never fully quiets. Conversations have thinned out and grown quieter. The fire has dropped from active flame to deep, stable coals. The orange has cooled to something closer to red. Someone puts one more piece of wood on, not for cooking now, but to keep the heat alive until morning. Sparks climb into the darkness above and go out before they reach the stars. People find their places. Children press themselves against warm adults, tucking their heads into the angles where comfort is most reliable. An elder draws a hide up around their neck and folds their hands beneath their cheek. A hunter who came back sore and satisfied stretches out, facing the fire, one arm resting on the dog that has chosen to sleep beside him tonight. The sounds of the night settle into their familiar layers. Closest, the steady give and crackle of the fire, the slow rhythm of breathing, the occasional murmur from someone turning in a dream. A little further, the rustle of small animals in the brush, the call of a night bird somewhere in the trees. Farther still, the long, eerie, spiraling call of hyenas, the deep, chest-level roar of a lion marking territory in the dark. These sounds are terrifying in principle, but they are also entirely familiar, woven into the backdrop of every night anyone in this camp has ever known. People learn to read the difference between a sound that means danger approaching and a sound that means the landscape is simply continuing to be itself. The threat is known, and the distance is approximately right. You can sleep. Above all of it, the sky keeps turning. Stars wheel in their slow arc toward the horizon. The moon climbs or sinks, depending on where it is in its cycle. Cloud passes across the light and falls away, revealing more. Some members of the band drop into sleep quickly, the body's exhaustion finally winning out. Others linger in the space between, not fully awake, not fully gone, thoughts moving loosely between the events of the day and the half-formed images that rise from firelight and memory. Perhaps someone replays a moment from the hunt, the particular way the animal moved in the last moments. Perhaps someone thinks of the child who did not survive last winter and imagines them somewhere up in that slow-turning dark. Perhaps someone simply lies still and listens to the breathing of the people they are most responsible for, and feels, in that listening, something that resembles gratitude. Eventually, even the lightest sleepers drift inward. The fire settles into a bed of shimmering coals. The dogs lower their heads onto their paws. For a few hours, this small cluster of humans is as physically vulnerable as it will ever be. Eyes closed, weapons out of reach, minds moving in other worlds, and yet, in another sense, they have never been more protected. They are surrounded by layers of safety they constructed themselves, knowledge of which ground is good to camp on, and which is not. A fire maintained with care, bedding between their bodies and the cold earth. A circle of people who will wake if one voice cries out, and the low warning sound of an animal that chose, for reasons it does not fully understand, to stay close. This is what a day in the life ultimately arrives at. Not only survival, not only the management of constant threat, but a nightly return to a shared center, to warmth, to story, to the quiet but persistent feeling that for all the dangers outside the firelight, this small circle of light in the dark is enough, at least until morning comes again. So after all of this, what did early humans actually do all day? They worked. They walked miles for roots and berries. They hauled meat back over rough ground. They shaped stone until their hands ached. They mended and built and prepared. They fed children. They watched the fire. They kept their attention turned toward whatever might be moving at the edge of the dark. But that was not all. They also sat. They stared into the flames and thought nothing in particular. They watched clouds moving across hillsides and lines of migrating animals crossing the plain below. They told stories so slowly and with so much meandering that a single account might stretch across several evenings. They played. Not just the children, but the adults, too. Gentle contests, mock arguments, small games with pebbles and sticks and bones. They sang. They pressed their hands against stone walls and left the impression there. They rested. Their lives were genuinely hard, but not in the way we have been taught to picture. Not an unbroken scramble from the moment the sun came up until the moment it went down, but pulses of real effort surrounded by long stretches of low, quiet time. A few hours of focused work, then a great deal of simply being together, moving through the seasons, moving with the light. That balance is the piece we tend to forget. Because here we are, with machines to carry what our muscles used to carry, with light to push back the dark, with more information available in a pocket than any hunter-gatherer could have conceived of. And yet somehow, many of us have ended up with less genuine leisure than they did, less unstructured time, fewer evenings of simply sitting and watching the world move. The irony runs deep. We built tools to free our time, and then filled the freed time back up with different obligations. Your Paleolithic ancestors never scrolled. They never composed messages by firelight, or checked notifications before sleeping. When the sun went down, the options narrowed to a handful. Talk, listen, make something, dream, or sleep. And their attention belonged to the people immediately around them, to the fire directly in front of them, to the sky above. The basic things that mattered then still matter in exactly the same way now. Community. The circle of people who hold your stories, who would give you the last of what they had when you were in need, who would stand close when the threat came. Today, that might be family, or old friends, or a group gathered around a particular shared interest. The shape has changed. The need is identical. Our nervous systems are still built for small groups organized around a shared task, a shared meal, a shared moment of laughter. Creativity. The first pendant carved from bone, the first open hand pressed against stone, the first rhythm tapped onto a hollow log. None of it made hunting easier or helped the group survive a drought, but it made life richer. It turned bare continuance into something worth telling about. That impulse to make something unnecessary and beautiful is still one of the most distinctly human things there is. Nature. For almost all of our history, we woke and slept with the light. We memorized the seasons. We could read a landscape the way we read text. Even now, living in cities, some part of the nervous system still goes quiet when it hears rain on a window, or wind moving through trees, or waves hitting a shore. Those sounds are older than language. They reach into something that predates our species. Purpose. Early humans had no 5-year plans, but they had reasons to get up, feed the children, help the group, keep the fire going one more night. Meaning was not something you had to go looking for. It was woven into the tasks of each day. Our purposes now may be more abstract, but the underlying question is still the same one. Who am I doing this for? And why does it matter? When we look back at their days, at the walking and the watching and the talking, at the work interrupted by laughter and by silence, what we see is not a vanished world unreachable from where we stand. We see a template, a reminder that a good human day has always had a particular shape. Effort and ease, noise and quiet, time with others, and a little time alone. As you lie here listening, you are already doing something your ancestors would recognize completely. You are letting the day end. You are stepping back from whatever was demanding your attention and moving toward something older and simpler. If this slow journey through the distant past has been something worth taking, you can, if you like, quietly tap the like button so more of these can find their way to people who might want them. And if you feel moved to leave a note, you could tell us where in the world you are tonight. What landscape is outside your walls? Desert or forest? City sounds or mountain quiet? The ocean somewhere below a window? All of it becomes part of the same circle. If you want to keep walking through these quiet passages of history, Subscribing means the next story will find you. And if you feel drawn to support this work more deeply, there is a way to do that through the channel membership. It is entirely optional. Simply listening, simply resting here, is already everything this was made for. For now, there is nothing you need to do at all. Just hold this image. The fire in your ancestors' camp has burned down to deep, steady coals. Most of the group has already found their way into sleep, curled beneath their skins, breathing slow and even. One last person adds a single piece of wood, not because the fire truly needs it, more out of habit, out of the long practice of care. Above them, above you, the same moon moves across the same sky. The same constellations look down, shifted a little by the slow turning of the ages, but still recognizably themselves. 40,000 years ago, a child lay on their back and watched those stars, fighting the pull of sleep for one more story, one more moment in the light. Someone reached over and touched their hair gently and told them that the hunt could wait until morning. Tonight, you carry the same old human need: to stop, to feel safe, to let the mind release whatever it has been holding through the day. The hunt can wait until morning. Everything can wait until morning. For now, rest. The same ancient sky is still there above you,